I was kneeling beside my 8-year-old son's casket when my ex-husband Derek spit on it. The sound was sharp and wet, cutting through the funeral home's respectful silence like a gunshot. In front of everyone, our families, our friends, our 7-year-old daughter Penny, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Tommy would be alive if he lived with me." My body went cold. The white roses I'd placed on Tommy's casket seemed to wilt under the weight of Derek's hatred. His mother, Marlene, stood behind him, nodding with righteous fury, her black dress making her look like a crow ready to pick at bones. My own father, Russell, started to rise from his seat, his electrician's hands clenched into fists, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The funeral director's face had gone pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, completely unprepared for this level of desecration. "You heard me, Francine," Derek continued, his voice booming through the room filled with 43 people who'd come to say goodbye to my baby boy. "This is on you, every single bit of it. You and your precious career, your constant excuses, your pathetic parenting." The whispers started immediately. Derek's brother nodded along. His cousin whispered something to her husband. Even some of my own relatives looked uncertain, uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. The weight of their doubt pressed down on me like a physical force. That's when my little girl stood up from the front pew. Penny, barely tall enough to see over the podium, her black dress with the small purple ribbons I'd let her add because purple was Tommy's favorite color. She looked so small, but her voice rang out clear and strong. "Daddy," she said, and the entire room turned to look at her. "Should I tell everyone what you did to Tommy the night before he died?" The funeral home went dead silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not even a breath. Derek's face drained of color so fast I thought he might faint. Marlene's hand flew to her chest. The funeral director froze mid-step, and in that moment, in that horrible, perfect silence, I knew that everything I thought I knew about my son's death was about to shatter. My name is Francine Morrison, and I'm about to tell you how my 7-year-old daughter exposed a truth so dark at her brother's funeral that it changed everything. This isn't just a story about loss or grief or even justice. This is about how the smallest voice in the room became the most powerful, and how sometimes the people we trust to protect our children become their greatest danger. Tommy was supposed to start 3rd grade next week. He'd picked out his backpack, bright blue with dinosaurs on it, and had been practicing his multiplication tables all summer. He wanted to impress his new teacher, Mrs. Caldini, who he'd met at orientation and who'd told him she loved students who worked hard. Instead of walking him to school next Monday, I was here, touching his cold face for the last time while his father's spit gleamed on the satin lining of his casket. But Penny was about to change everything. My baby girl, who still slept with a nightlight and couldn't tie her shoes properly, was about to stand up to a room full of adults and speak a truth that would send her father to prison. This is our story. The morning of Tommy's funeral was the kind of gray that seeps into your bones. I'd been up since 3 a.m. sitting in his room, holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur, a worn green T-Rex named Chomper that he'd slept with every single night since he was 3. The dinosaur still smelled like him. That little boy smell of apple shampoo and playground dirt that I'd give anything to bottle up and keep forever. Tommy had been gone for 5 days. 5 days since the accident that shouldn't have happened. 5 days of my daughter Penny asking when her brother was coming home. 5 days of fielding calls from Derek, each one more venomous than the last. He'd called me a murderer. He'd said I'd killed our son with my negligence. He'd threatened to make sure everyone knew what kind of mother I really was. "Francine, honey, it's time," my father Russell said softly from the doorway. He'd been my rock through everything. The divorce 2 years ago, the custody battle that followed, and now through this unimaginable loss. His weathered hands, the same ones that had taught Tommy how to use a screwdriver just last month, trembled slightly as he straightened his tie. "I can't do this, Dad," I whispered, clutching Chomper tighter. "I can't say goodbye to him." "You're not saying goodbye," Russell said, walking over to sit beside me on Tommy's bed. The rocket ship sheets crinkled under his weight. "You're saying, see you later. That boy is always going to be with you, right here." He placed his hand over his heart, and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time since Tommy died. The custody arrangement had been simple enough after the divorce. I had primary custody. Derek got them every other weekend. The judge had concerns about Derek's temper, but nothing documented enough to deny visitation. Just a few incidents that Derek's lawyer had explained away. The time he'd punched a hole in the wall during an argument, that was just stress from work. The time he'd screamed at Tommy's t-ball coach, that was just being a protective father. The time Penny came home with bruises on her arm, she'd fallen at the playground, Derek said, and who could prove otherwise? Tommy had been staying with Derek that weekend when everything went wrong. It was supposed to be a regular visit. Pick up Friday after school, drop off Sunday evening. Derek lived in a nice 2-story house in Meadowbrook, the kind with a big backyard and a tree house he'd built to prove he was the fun parent. The neighbors all thought he was Father of the Year. He coached youth football, volunteered at the community center, and never missed a chance to tell everyone how the family court system had screwed him over by not giving him full custody. At the funeral home, I helped Penny into her black dress, the one we'd bought just days ago at Target because she'd outgrown all her formal clothes. She'd grown 2 inches since Christmas, and Tommy had been so proud that his little sister was getting taller, saying she'd be able to reach the good cereal on the high shelf soon. "Mommy, will Daddy be nice today?" Penny asked, her green eyes searching mine. She had Derek's eyes, but my stubbornness, a combination that meant she saw everything and forgot nothing. "Today is about saying goodbye to Tommy," I told her, smoothing her auburn hair and pinning it back with the silver clips my mother had worn to my wedding. "Everyone will be on their best behavior." She looked at me with an expression far too knowing for a 7-year-old. "Even Grandma Marlene?" Marlene had never liked me. From the moment Derek brought me home, she'd made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious son. I was too career-focused, she said, too independent. Not the kind of woman who would make Derek the center of her world. When I became a pediatric nurse, she'd said it was selfish to care for other people's children when I should be home with my own. When I filed for divorce after Derek pushed me down the stairs, an incident he convinced everyone was an accident, she'd called me a gold digger, even though Derek made less money than I did. "Even Grandma Marlene," I lied, fixing Penny's collar. "We're all here because we love Tommy." The funeral home smelled like lilies and furniture polish. I'd picked the smallest room, thinking it would just be family and a few close friends. But word had spread through our small Ohio town, and soon there were more people than seats. Tommy's teacher was there, clutching tissues. His baseball coach. The parents of his best friend, Aiden. Even Mrs. Henley from Derek's neighborhood, though I was surprised to see her since she and Derek had been feuding about property lines for years. Everything was exactly as I'd planned it, down to the songs and the photos displayed on boards around the room. What I hadn't planned for was what would happen when Derek walked through those doors. The service started at 10 a.m. Derek arrived 15 minutes late with his mother Marlene, both of them radiating hostility like heat from a furnace. He'd been drinking. I could smell the bourbon from 3 rows away, mixing with his expensive cologne in a combination that made my stomach turn. His black suit was impeccable, of course. Derek always knew how to look the part of the grieving father, even with alcohol on his breath at his son's funeral. Marlene kept whispering to anyone who'd listen, her voice carrying despite her attempts at discretion. This wouldn't have happened at Derek's house. She never watched those kids properly, always working, always leaving them with strangers. Each word was a knife, and she knew exactly where to twist them. During the pastor's eulogy, I heard Derek scoff when Tommy was described as a bright light who loved his mother's bedtime stories and helping his grandfather in the garage. My hands shook as I held Penny's small fingers. She squeezed back, a silent message that she heard it too. Pastor Williams continued, unaware of the tension crackling through the room like electricity before a storm. Tommy had a special gift for making others laugh. His teacher tells me he once brought his pet hamster to show and tell in his lunchbox because, and I quote, "Mr. Whiskers wanted to learn math too." A few people chuckled softly through their tears. I remembered that day. The panicked call from school, Tommy's earnest explanation that hamsters were probably good at counting sunflower seeds. But Derek shifted in his seat, muttering something to his mother about encouraging stupidity. When Pastor Williams asked if anyone wanted to share memories, Tommy's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, stood first. She talked about his kindness, how he'd given his lunch money to a classmate who'd forgotten theirs. Derek's cousin Brad went next, though his story about Tommy at last year's family reunion felt hollow, like he was speaking just to fill silence. Then Marlene stood. "My grandson was a special boy," she began, dabbing at her dry eyes with a handkerchief. "He deserved better than he got. He deserved a stable home with 2 parents who put him first. Instead, he got shuffled back and forth like a piece of luggage, confused and upset, never knowing where he belonged." My father started to stand, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I mouthed. "She wasn't worth it." "Some people," Marlene continued, looking directly at me, "think their careers are more important than their children. Some people think they can have it all, the job, the independence, the children when it's convenient. But children need consistency. They need a parent who's there, not one who works night shifts and weekend rotations." The room was uncomfortably quiet. Half the people there knew I'd switched to day shifts 6 months ago specifically to be home more. But Marlene didn't care about facts. When it came time for final viewings, I went first. I kissed Tommy's forehead, cold and wrong under my lips. I whispered that I loved him, that I was sorry I wasn't there when he needed me most. I tucked Chomper next to him, making sure the dinosaur's worn face was visible. Tommy would have wanted his buddy with him. Then Derek approached. "Move," he commanded, not even looking at me. I stepped aside, pulling Penny with me. She pressed against my leg, trembling slightly. Derek stood over the casket for a long moment. People later told me they thought he was praying, but I saw his face contort, saw the rage building like pressure in a volcano. That's when he did it. He leaned over the casket, gathered saliva in his mouth with deliberate purpose, and with violent force spit directly onto the white satin lining next to Tommy's head. The sound echoed in the silent room, wet and full of hatred. "You did this," Derek announced, turning to face the entire congregation. His voice filled the space, commanding attention. "My son would be alive if the court had listened to me, if he lived with me full time instead of with her." He pointed at me, his fingers shaking with rage. She was too busy with her nursing shifts to watch him properly, always pawning him off on babysitters and her father. She chose her career over our son, and now he's dead. Marlene stood up, nodding vigorously. "It's true. Derek begged for full custody. Begged. But the courts always favor the mothers, even negligent ones, even ones who can't keep their children safe." My knees gave out. The strength I'd been clinging to evaporated like morning mist. I collapsed onto the pew, the wooden edge cutting into my ribs as my father rushed to catch me. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Some of Derek's relatives were nodding along with Marlene. Others looked horrified. My own sister Amy was crying, her husband trying to shield their kids from the scene. "She killed my grandson with her neglect," Marlene continued, her voice rising to near hysteria. "Derek told me Tommy called him crying the night before, saying he didn't want to go back to her house. My grandson knew where he was safe, and it wasn't with her." The funeral director, Mr. Garrett, finally moved forward, his professional composure cracking. But the damage was spreading through the room like poison, doubt and judgment, replacing grief in too many faces. Through my tears and shock, I heard a small voice, clear as a bell, cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. That's not true. Penny had stood up, all 7 years and 48 pounds of her, facing down a room full of adults. Her hands were clenched into tiny fists at her sides, and I could see her whole body trembling, but her chin was raised high. She looked exactly like she had the day she'd stood up to the 3rd-grade bully who'd been picking on a kindergartner, terrified but determined. "Penny, sit down," Derek commanded, his face reddening. The veins in his neck stood out like cords, the same way they did before he'd punch walls or throw things. "No," she said louder this time. "You're lying, Daddy. Tommy didn't call you crying. You called us." The funeral director moved forward, clearly unsure how to handle a child confronting an adult at a funeral. His hands fluttered nervously, reaching toward Penny, then pulling back. But my father held up his hand, signaling to let her speak. Russell stood slowly, positioning himself between Derek and the children's section, his meaning clear. "Sweetheart," Marlene said in a syrupy voice that made my skin crawl. "You're confused. This is a hard day for everyone. Children don't always remember things correctly when they're upset." "I'm not confused," Penny interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I remember everything. I have a really good memory. Mommy says it's called a photographic memory, and I remember that Daddy called us at Mommy's house 3 nights before Tommy died. It was Thursday night at 7:43 because I was watching the clock, waiting for my show to come on at 8. The specificity made people lean forward. This wasn't a confused child. This was testimony. He was really mad because Mommy wouldn't switch weekends with him, Penny continued. He wanted to take us to his friend Jake's lake house, but Mommy said no because Tommy had his science fair on Saturday. Tommy worked really hard on his volcano. Grandpa Russell helped him make it shoot real foam lava 20 inches high. Derek's face was turning purple. Penny, I said sit down, now. But something had awakened in my daughter. Maybe it was grief, maybe it was anger, maybe it was just the pure injustice of watching her father desecrate her brother's funeral. She took a step forward, moving away from me and closer to the center aisle, where everyone could see her clearly. You called Tommy a baby, she said, her voice steady now. You said he was weak and pathetic for wanting to stay home for some stupid science project. You said real boys choose fun over homework. You said Mommy was turning him into a sissy. That's enough, Derek roared, starting toward her. Several people gasped. Mr. Garrett stepped back, clearly out of his depth. Russell moved faster than I'd seen him move in years, planting himself directly in Derek's path. You take one more step toward that little girl, and funeral or no funeral, I'll lay you out, he said quietly. Let her finish. This is ridiculous, Marlene shrieked. She's 7 years old. She doesn't understand what she's saying. I understand everything, Penny said, and there was something in her voice that made the entire room go still again. I understand that Daddy gets mean when he drinks beer. I understand that he says bad words about Mommy when she's not there. I understand that he told Tommy that crying is for girls and babies. She turned to look at Derek directly, and I saw him actually take a step back from the force of her gaze. Should I tell everyone what you said to Tommy on that phone call, Daddy? She asked. Should I tell them what happened when we got to your house on Friday? Should I tell them what you did the night before he died? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the traffic outside seemed to stop. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Derek's lawyer friend, Martin, half rose from his seat, his face pale. Mrs. Henley from Derek's neighborhood had her phone out, recording everything. She's lying, Derek said, but his voice had lost its power. She's been coached. Francine has filled her head with lies to cover up her own guilt. I don't lie, Penny said simply. Lying is wrong. Tommy taught me that. He said even when telling the truth gets you in trouble, it's better than being a liar. He learned that from Mommy, not from you. She looked around the room, making eye contact with various adults, some of whom couldn't meet her gaze. My daddy did something bad to Tommy, she announced. Something really, really bad, and I can prove it. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, some demanding Derek explain himself, others insisting this was inappropriate, that a child shouldn't be speaking at all. But Penny stood there in the middle of it all, a tiny pillar of truth in a sea of adult chaos, waiting for her moment to deliver the blow that would change everything. The funeral home went dead silent. Even the funeral director stopped moving, his hand frozen halfway to his phone. Every single person in that room was staring at my 7-year-old daughter, waiting for her to continue. You told Tommy he was weak, Penny said, her voice growing stronger with each word. You said real boys don't cry about staying home for some stupid science project. You said he was becoming a mama's boy, and you were going to toughen him up whether he liked it or not. That's enough, Derek roared, his face contorted with rage. But Russell and 2 other men, Tom from my work and Derek's own cousin Brad, had moved to block his path. The night before Tommy died, Friday night at your house, you made him sleep outside, Penny continued, tears streaming down her face now, but her voice never wavering. In the backyard, in his underwear, because he cried about missing the science fair. You said he needed to learn to be tough like a real man. It was 40 degrees, Daddy. The weather app on your tablet said it was 40 degrees and there was a freeze warning. Gasps echoed through the room. Marlene's face had gone white as paper, her hand pressed to her mouth. Someone in the back row was crying audibly. I snuck him a blanket through the window, Penny said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Tommy's bedroom window, but you caught me and took it away. You said I was making him soft, too. You said if I helped him again, I'd be sleeping outside next." "She's lying," Derek shouted, but his voice cracked. "She's been coached. This is all Francine's doing." "I took pictures," Penny said quietly, and the room somehow got even quieter. "On the tablet you gave me for Christmas, the pink one with the unicorn case, I took pictures of Tommy outside, crying, wearing just his Spider-Man underwear. His lips were blue, Daddy. His lips were blue, and he was shaking so hard." Mrs. Henley stood up from her seat in the back. "She's telling the truth. The child came to my back door at 6 in the morning on Saturday. She showed me the pictures. She showed me videos." "I took a video of you yelling at him through the door," Penny continued, looking directly at Derek now. "You said, 'You can come in when you stop being a little bitch.' You used the B word to Tommy. He was crying so hard he threw up in the bushes. I have a video of that too." Several people had their phones out now, recording everything. Derek's lawyer friend was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to figure out the legal implications of what was unfolding. "I showed them to Mrs. Henley Saturday morning," Penny said, "and she said she was going to call someone, but then Tommy—" Her voice broke for the first time. "Tommy tried to climb the tree to get back inside through his bedroom window." I felt the blood drain from my face as the pieces clicked together. The tree, the old oak tree next to the house, the one with branches that reached toward Tommy's second-story window. "You'd locked all the doors," Penny whispered, but in the silent room, everyone heard her. "Even the dog door. You put the security bar on it so he couldn't crawl through. He tried, Daddy. He tried to get in through the dog door first, but he got stuck and scraped his whole stomach. I have pictures of the scratches, too." Derek lunged forward, breaking past Brad's grip, but 3 men, including the funeral director, restrained him. Someone had already called 911. I could hear sirens in the distance. "He fell, Mommy," Penny said, turning to me, her face crumpling. "Tommy fell from the tree because Daddy locked him outside and he was trying to get back in. He was so cold and scared. He kept saying, 'I want my mom, I want my mom,' over and over. I tried to unlock the door, but Daddy had the key in his pocket, and he was passed out on the couch with his beer bottles." Marlene let out a wail that sounded barely human. "Derek, tell me she's lying. Tell me you didn't do this to my grandson." But Derek wasn't denying it anymore. He was just standing there, held by 3 men, his face alternating between rage and something that might have been fear. "Mrs. Henley has the tablet," Penny said, exhaustion creeping into her voice. "She took it that morning to keep it safe. She said she knew something bad had happened, and she wanted to make sure the evidence was protected. She knew Daddy would try to delete everything. She called the police that morning, but they said Tommy was already at the hospital and they'd investigate later, but then Tommy died, and everyone said it was an accident and I didn't know what to do." Mrs. Henley was crying openly now. "I have everything," she confirmed. 23 photos, 4 videos. I've been trying to get them to the right people, but no one would listen. They all said it was just a tragic accident, a boy falling from a tree. No one wanted to believe Derek could do something like this. The police arrived then, 3 officers entering the funeral home with confusion written on their faces. Unprepared to find a child's funeral had become a crime scene revelation. The police arrived within minutes, their presence transforming the funeral home into something between a crime scene and a courtroom. Mrs. Henley was already pulling out her phone, showing the officers the photos and videos she'd carefully preserved on multiple devices. She'd been trying to reach authorities all morning, but hadn't known the full urgency until it was too late. She thought Tommy was recovering in the hospital from a fall, not fighting for a life he'd already lost. Derek was arrested at his own son's funeral. They handcuffed him right there in front of everyone, his expensive suit wrinkled as they led him past Tommy's casket. He didn't look at his son. He didn't look at anyone. Marlene collapsed in the 3rd row, sobbing and repeating, I didn't know, oh God, I didn't know." We had to postpone the burial. The medical examiner needed to review Tommy's case again with this new evidence. But when we finally laid Tommy to rest 3 days later, it was peaceful. Just family and close friends who truly loved him. No pretense, no performance, no one there to judge or blame. Penny insisted on reading a letter she'd written to her brother, promising to take care of Chomper and to be brave like he'd always been. The right kind of brave, she said, not Daddy's kind. The investigation revealed everything Penny had documented was true. Tommy had died from head trauma after falling from the tree at 2 a.m. Saturday morning, hypothermic and desperate to get inside. His blood alcohol was 0, but his body showed signs of severe hypothermia. The scratches on his stomach matched the metal edges of the dog door. His fingernails were torn from trying to climb the tree in the dark. Derek was charged with involuntary manslaughter and child endangerment. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Marlene, broken by the revelation, testified against her own son. She told the court she'd believed his stories about my neglect because she couldn't imagine her own child being capable of such cruelty. She'd seen what she wanted to see, believed what was easier to believe. Derek got 12 years. His lawyer argued for less, claiming it was discipline gone wrong, but the videos Penny had taken showed otherwise. They showed a man taking pleasure in his son's suffering, laughing when Tommy begged to come inside, calling him pathetic when he cried from the cold. The judge said it was one of the worst cases of child abuse she'd seen in 30 years on the bench. But what haunts me most isn't Derek's actions. It's that Penny carried this burden alone. She'd tried to protect her brother in the only way a 7-year-old could think of, by gathering evidence like she'd seen on the detective shows she watched with me. She'd known something terrible might happen, and she'd prepared proof like a tiny investigator, hoping someone would listen. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, Mommy," she said one night, 6 months later. We were in therapy by then, both of us learning how to live with the weight of what happened. I thought if I told, Daddy would get madder and hurt Tommy worse. I thought if I just kept recording, someday someone would see and make him stop. The therapist says, Penny saved potentially dozens of future children by speaking up when she did. Derek's coaching position with youth football, his volunteer work with the Boys and Girls Club, all of it ended that day at the funeral. 3 other families came forward during the trial, saying their children had complained about Mr. Morrison's toughening up techniques, but they'd dismissed it as strict coaching. But I don't care about other children he might have hurt. I care about the one he did hurt. The one who climbed a tree in his underwear on a cold March night trying to get back to safety. The one whose last words, according to Penny, were, "I just want my mom." Tommy's science fair volcano sits on our mantle now. He never got to present it, but Russell made sure it still works. Once a week, Penny and I make it erupt, watching the foam lava shoot up just like Tommy wanted to show his class. Next to it sits Chomper, keeping watch, and Tommy's favorite photo. The 3 of us at the beach last summer, building sandcastles, safe and warm and together. The truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just shifts the prison bars from one person to another, but at least now the right person is behind them. And my brave little girl? She speaks up now, every single time something doesn't feel right. She learned too young that silence can be deadly, but she also learned that even the smallest voice can shatter the biggest lies. Tommy would be proud of his little sister. I know I am. She saved other children from her father's cruelty, even though she couldn't save her brother. That's a burden no child should carry, but she carries it with grace beyond her years. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to the signs of child abuse, please like this video and share it with others who need to hear it. Your share could help someone recognize warning signs and save a child. Please comment below with your thoughts. Every story shared helps build awareness. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, real stories that matter. Together we can make sure no child suffers in silence.